Today, I wanted to wrap up season 2 by going through some of the main things that we talked about through this season. We've covered a whole lot throughout the winter and spring as I came on here every week, and we tackled a lot of really difficult topics this season. Hey, my name is Sarah Short, and I'm a busy mom of 5 kids, and after almost 2 decades of parenting, I'm here to share with you everything I've learned from my triumphs and successes and from my biggest mistakes. Think of me as the mom who's been where you are, remembers how hard, hilarious, and exhausting your days are, and wants to help you navigate your days as a mom with courage and intention, all while fostering amazing relationships with your kids and a home life you love. My Nana once told me, there's no way but through. Turns out she was right, in life and in motherhood. So throw in some headphones and come laugh and cry with me as we talk about all things mom. This is the No Way But Through podcast. Welcome back into the No Way But Through podcast. I am so glad you're here with me today as we wrap up the last episode of season 2. It is so hard for me to believe that I'm wrapping up this second season of this podcast. It feels like yesterday, like literally, it feels like I was just in the place where I had decided to start this podcast and was dreaming about what it might look like and beginning to do all of the behind the scenes work that's required to launch a podcast. And now here we are. I am finishing my second season, and it really does feel quite unbelievable to me. If you have been following along since the beginning of season 1, thank you so much for being here for all of these episodes and for both of these seasons and for coming back and listening week after week. There are some of you that listen that I've gotten to know quite well only because you listen to this podcast. This is how I met you. And you communicate with me either via email or you send me messages on Instagram about the different things you're dealing with your kids or the different pieces of this podcast that have been really helpful to you. And it is such an honor for me that you would throw in your AirPods or hop in the car and put it on and listen in carpool week after week. And that you then message me and let me know what's helpful and how you're trying different things with your kids and that you've now booked vacations with them because you've been encouraged to do that by this podcast. I wondered if this work would matter. I wondered if you all would listen. I wondered if you'd share it with your friends and with your sisters, and you have, and it has blown me away. And if you're new to this podcast, you just started listening to it this season, or this is the first episode you're listening to because someone said, hey, this is a really good place for you to start. If you want to know what the No Way But Through podcast is about, well, welcome to you. I'm so glad you're here. You have a whole lot of episodes that you can listen to this summer if you'd like to get caught up and be ready to jump in with us in season 3. Today, I wanted to wrap up season 2 by going through some of the main things that we talked about through this season. We've covered a whole lot throughout the winter and spring as I came on here every week, and we tackled a lot of really difficult topics this season. In fact, this season, I took on some of the topics that I didn't quite feel ready to take on last year, because even though these were things that you were asking me to podcast on and I'd had lots of questions about, I didn't quite feel ready. But after getting one season under my belt and getting to know a bunch of you and seeing how utterly lovely you guys are, y'all helped me feel brave to tackle some of these. The hard stuff matters. A lot of times the really difficult questions, some of the stuff that we talked about this season can be things that are hard to find help on or to find a trustworthy voice or a mom that still remembers what it's like to go through some of these things. And as I've told you through both seasons of this podcast, I'm still in this with you. I'm still raising my kids and my baby is still in elementary school. So I'm dealing with a lot of the newer kid stuff that you guys are dealing with as well. But now I have 2 adult children, so I have some good perspective and the benefit of time and the benefit of my mistakes. I haven't gotten everything right. In fact, I've gotten a lot wrong, but I've learned from those mistakes, and I'm a better mom than I was when I first became a mom. I laugh with my friends often because we all talk about how we're so much better at being our younger kids' mom than we were to our first kids because we get to do things over again. We get to see the mistakes that we made with our first kids and what is really important, what matters, and what we can just let go of. And so my last couple of kids, they're actually getting a better mother than my kids got. My kids laugh about that and they're like, yep, Mom, you are way more chill than you were when I was little. And it's so true because I've figured out what matters and I let go of a whole lot of stuff that I didn't let go before. So let's hop in and recap what we talked about this season. Each of these episodes is there and available to you. So if there's anything in this list that I'm going through and you think, gosh, I really need to go back and listen to that full episode, I want to hear more about that. There's a full episode on each of these topics. But for today, I'm just going to recap some of the major points that we talked about throughout this season. We started out with episode 15. In this episode, we talked about social media. I took a nice long break from social media in between recording season 1 and season 2 of this podcast, and it was such a good thing for me. And that's one of the things I talked to you about in episode 15. I share with you that breaks are really good and really healthy, and I would even say necessary if you're on social media in order to maintain a healthy relationship with it. I also talked with you about how oftentimes what people are looking for is a connection on social media and to try to resist the temptation to be cynical about people when they're posting on social media. Most people, they're not out to make you envious. They're not out to make you jealous. They just want to make a connection with you. And if you happen to be following them, they're posting, their life is unfolding before them and they're posting stuff that's happening to them. And they just want to make a connection with the people that are following them. Another thing I talked with you about on this episode is to educate your kids about social media from a really young age. You don't have to give them access to social media to show them how you use it and what it is and why it's good. Social media is not bad in and of itself. In fact, it can be used for a whole lot of good. And I talk about that in this episode. But one of the things that you can do is to really involve your kids from the time they're really little and show them why you're posting and what you're posting about and why and what it looks like to engage in healthy ways on social media so that you can model that for them. And later on down the road in the years when they're ready to have a device and they're ready to get on social media, they will know what's good about it. And then you can begin to instruct them on the pitfalls and some of the difficulties, but to really involve your kids from a very young age. In episode 16, I talk with you about how we celebrate our kids' milestone birthdays. I share with you why we've chosen the specific ages and birthdays that we've chosen, and I share with you exactly how we celebrate our kids at those specific ages. For us and our family, the milestone birthdays that we celebrate are 1, 5, 10, 13, and 18. And I walk you through specifically how we celebrate each of our kids when they hit those milestone birthdays. And I give you examples of what that looks like for us by telling you some stories about my different kids at different ages and using them as examples in how we celebrated them on their milestone birthdays. In episode 17, I shared with you about our approach to discipline and how we ask one question and have 2 rules anytime our kids need discipline. We wanted our approach to discipline to be very succinct and we wanted it to be very simple. And both Jason and I wanted to be on the same page about it. So I share with you that we have one question that we ask that is a question around age-appropriate behavior. We stop and ask ourselves, is what our child exhibiting age-appropriate behavior, or is this something that requires discipline? Is this something they're going to outgrow simply because they're going to get older, or is this something we need to really address here? And then I talk to you about the 2 rules we have in our family. We don't have a whole lot of rules over here, but there are 2 non-negotiables in our home. behaviors that we address every single time they occur. And those are deceit and disrespect. I talk with you in this episode about how deceit, if it takes root in a tiny little person's life, 3, 4, 5 years old, if it does, how that can have long-term, devastating consequences on them as adults. And that we address deceit every single time. The second one is disrespect. I share with you how disrespect between our kids with each other, how we don't allow that to go on. I talk with you about how disrespect isn't really just about someone who is an authority over you, because sometimes authority needs to be challenged. But disrespect is about how you treat other people and how you honor them with your words and how you treat them. This is one of the most popular episodes on this podcast from season 1 or season 2. And I've gotten many, many messages this winter and spring about how this podcast has really been impactful for you guys and how it's given you a lot of things to think about and how it really has affected your life and family as you've begun to implement some of this. In episode 18, it was all about what God has taught me in different seasons of motherhood. I walk through all the different ways that God has taught me things from when I had my first newborn until now, having adult kids, and what God really taught me in each of those specific seasons. This episode was so personal to me, and it was one of my favorite episodes that I've ever recorded on this podcast because God has been so good and so faithful to me as a mother. So instead of summarizing all of that right here, I would love for you and encourage you to go back and listen to that episode 18, what each season of motherhood has taught me, because I think you will find it encourages you as I share with you from each season and how different verses impacted me as a mother and encouraged me and built me up and gave me strength to tackle each different season that I've walked through in motherhood. In episode 19, I talked about when our kids are hurt and disappointed and how we have so much opportunity when our kids are walking through hard stuff. I shared with you how we get to model for our kids what it looks like to comfort someone else, how we get to teach them how not to treat other people because of the way that they are feeling in that moment. I talk with you about how the hurts and disappointments that our kids experience help them grow in strength and resilience. And that even the concept that some friendships are only for seasons, I talk about that with you and how when our kids are going through hard things and they lose a friendship, how we can really help them understand this concept. And then I talk with you about how, most importantly, when our kids are hurt and disappointed, how we have an opportunity to point them to God and that He is the best friend they will ever have, that He will never leave them, that He's always with them, and that He is the ultimate example of a good friend. In episode 20, I talk with you about what the We Are the World documentary teaches us about friendship. This was another one of my favorite episodes that I recorded this season because I loved this documentary so much. I was a kid of the 80s and I loved 80s music. I still love 80s music, but there were some really unlikely things that this episode could teach us about friendship. And so I wanted to podcast that and share that with you guys. One of the main things I loved about this episode was the concept of check your ego at the door. This was a sign that Quincy Jones hung on the door before all of these famous people came together to record this song on this one night in the 80s. And all of those celebrities were coming together for one night. And I loved his word to them, his encouragement to them to check their egos at the door. You'll have to listen to that episode to hear the rest, but I think you will find that you'll really be encouraged by this one because I think it's really insightful. And I also hope that it encourages you to go watch the documentary because the documentary is so well done and it really does have some good things to teach us about friendship. In episode 21, I shared with you 5 life-giving phrases our kids need to hear. I talk with you about why words matter and how the weight of our words as parents carry extraordinary weight with our kids. Your words, they weigh more than the words of other people, and I talk to you about why. And then I share with you these 5 life-giving phrases that our kids need to hear. They need to hear you say, I love you. They need to hear and know that you want to say yes to them, even when you have reasons that you need to say no. Our kids need to hear you don't have to be good at everything so that they can continue to try new things. They need to hear us say, I am proud of you. And lastly, our kids need to have their feelings validated. They need to know that their feelings are real and that we see and we hear them. But then we need to come back to them with truth. And our kids need to hear what is true about them and what is true about the God that made them and loves them. Episodes 22 and 23 were a 2-part podcast on helping our kids deal with change. In episode 22, I talked with you about 2 essential things that will really help you walk your kids through change. One is if you want a close-knit family that's there for each other, you have to be intentional about it. And 2, while your kids may not remember things that are happening to them before the ages of 5, 6, 7, they are still being formed by what is happening. And with that, I encourage you to take your babies on vacation with you. Take your babies and your toddlers and your preschoolers to their siblings' games. And that in all of that, you're developing a closeness within your family that will then help you all to be able to walk each other through change and be there for one another. And then in part 2, I talked with you about specifically walking your kids through different kinds of change. For example, when a new baby enters the family, or when a sibling first goes off to kindergarten and the littler ones are left behind, or you have a divorce in the family, or you have unexpected hardship or sickness, and even the importance of counseling for your older kids or teens, and how counseling can be such a great tool to help them deal with change. These were really, really good episodes, and I'd love for you to go back and listen to those if you didn't get a chance to this season. In episode 24, I shared with you 3 things our kids need from us when they're going through a hard time. Those 3 things being prayer, guidance, and attention. I talked through with you each of those things and why each of them is so important and how they're different. I talked with you about attention specifically, that sometimes that can be really difficult if you're needing to give more attention to one sibling because they're going through a really hard time, and how that can be difficult on their other siblings, but how to navigate that with their siblings and really teach them some good things as you walk through this with each of them. In episode 25, I shared with you the number 1 family vacation tip you need to know. And that tip is to lower your expectations of your kids and to raise your expectations of yourselves as parents. I can't tell you how much this radically changed the way Jason and I saw our family vacations, and how it helped us to reject the cynical idea that family vacations are just family trips, because they're not really vacations for us as parents. This way of thinking that I talk you through in this episode, it made us better parents, and it continues to challenge and make us better parents even today, now that our kids are older. And just how much we've come to love taking our kids on vacations with us and what it's done to the relationships inside our family. In episode 26, that one was all about making date nights happen and 10 practical ways that you can make them happen in your life or marriage, no matter what obstacles you have in front of you. I share with you things we learned from other couples that were many years ahead of us and many years ago that had gone before us in parenting, and how we were able to then have healthy date nights, regular date nights, because of these things we'd learned from other parents. I shared with you things like the double date night at home, where you invite another couple over after your kids go to bed and just hang out and order takeout, and how that enabled us to have date nights and hang out with friends when we didn't have money or didn't have a babysitter and couldn't go out. I even shared with you things like the $10 date night, which would probably look more like the $20 date night now that 20 years has gone by. But you don't need a big budget to go out on a date with each other. These are just 2 of the 10 practical things that I share with you on how to make date nights happen. Whether you have no money or no time because you have a traveling husband, or you travel yourself for work, or if you have no babysitters available because you just moved to a new city like I did when I was a young mom. This is a great practical episode for prioritizing your marriage and prioritizing date nights, whatever season of parenting you're in. And lastly, in episode 27, I shared with you what we can do when our kids or we are getting left out and excluded. This was one of those topics that you all have asked me to podcast about, and I just wasn't sure that I wanted to take it on, but it is really such an important issue, and I wanted to give you as much help as I could in this area. So I shared with you 5 things that I keep coming back to and that I remind myself of when one of my kids is being left out, or I'm being left out or excluded in the mom world or in friendship. I share with you about living an inclusive life and what that looks like. I shared with you about how God is often protecting you or your kids from further hurt by not allowing us to become part of a group that might consistently hurt us once we're inside of that group. I talk with you about asking the really hard question of, is there something that I'm doing, or is there something that one of my kids might be doing that is making people not want to include them or me? And also, I talk about how your life will speak for itself, that if you are living an inclusive life and you get accused of being exclusive or leaving others out, and your intention was not to do that in any way, that your life, it will speak for itself. You live an inclusive life, and your life will speak to it. And lastly, I challenge you to stay open to new friendships. No matter what season of life you're in or how full your friendship plate is, I encourage you to stay open to new friendships. If you're in a season where you're feeling extremely lonely, or you've moved to a new town and you don't have any friends, it can be tempting to become bitter or just to say, I've given up on friendship altogether. But I encourage you in this episode to stay open to friendships and to keep your heart tender, because you never know, as my Nana would say, you never know who's coming around the corner. So that was our very, very full season 2 on the No Way But Through podcast. If you've missed any of these episodes, or you haven't listened to any of these, and this is the starting point that one of your friends sent you to get a feel for this podcast, you now have a whole summer's worth of episodes to catch up on. And I would love it if you listen to any of these and they are helpful for you, to reach out and let me know. You can always reach me over on Instagram or on Facebook at No Way But Through. I'll be popping in and out of Instagram all summer long, and I would love to hear from you. And I would love it if you really have loved this podcast. If you haven't had a chance to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for me on No Way But Through, that would just be so helpful, because it allows other moms to be able to find this podcast as well. And of course, I love it when you share episodes of this podcast with your family and with your friends. So many of you have found this podcast because somebody shared it with you that knew me or that had found it first. And so I love it when you share this podcast with others. It is and remains such an honor that you all come on here and you listen to this podcast, and that you've done that now, some of you now for 2 full seasons. I absolutely love sharing with you the things that God has taught me in the last 2 decades that I've been a mom, and I am so excited for all that we have ahead of us in season 3 of this podcast. Thank you all so much for joining me today and for joining me for season 2 of the No Way But Through podcast. See y'all next time. You've just listened to another episode of the No Way But Through podcast. If you want to connect with other like-minded moms and join our growing online community, head on over to Instagram and follow along with us at No Way But Through. You can always reach me over there throughout the week. And if you'd like to financially support this podcast, there's a link at the bottom of every episode where you can do just that.